Welcome everyone to Couch Potato Diary. Happy Wednesday. My name is Peter Klein. Thank you very much for tuning in, whether you're watching live or catching this on a replay after. Forgot the light back there, so there we go. Lighting up the world here on a Wednesday. It is a busy show. It is another list-heavy show, which I'm realizing more and more that I'm doing. Yeah, gonna be a whole lot of fun today as we look at the NFL with the power rankings today going 32-1. Plus, big changes in the pound-for-pound rankings in both the UFC men's and women's power rankings and in the world of boxing, and the basketball and hockey previews continue today. In basketball, we are looking at the most talented teams, and in hockey, we are looking at the players on the hot seat and coaches on the hot seat, people who need big years this year in the NHL. But there is big news from the world of basketball, so let's start with that. As Toxic brought up in the chat, it is crazy that Adrian Wojnarowski, Woj, has announced his retirement. The last Woj Bomb is that he is leaving the broadcasting and journalism world after like 30 bajillion years in covering everything. He is off to be a general manager with Bonaventure's men's basketball team. And honestly, when I saw that he was going to be a general manager for a college basketball team, a number of things went through my mind. One, college basketball teams have general managers now. Two, I was like, oh, that's a little weird that he's going to do both, but I guess he can. Like, he's very good at what he does. And then you see the retirement. It's like, no, he's not going to do both. He is, in fact, just doing the one thing. So it really is the end of an era when it comes to this sort of a thing. He has been one of the gold standards for insider reporting, not just in basketball, but really in all of sports. When you look at this latest kind of era in sports journalism and broadcast journalism and the, I guess, I don't want to say added influence, because insiders have always had influence. I think we have more of them, and because of the reach of social media, we have access to them very, very quickly. And so that has been something that has been really interesting to see. And Woj was one of the first ones who you had to mute on draft day because he was like 8 picks ahead. You'd be watching in the first round, and he's already off in like the 2025 draft. Like he's way over there. The guy was unbelievable at his job, and again, one of the gold standards in this industry. And now, I don't want to say leaves a giant hole, because there's actually a couple. He had amazing competition with Shams, who I would imagine ESPN is going to be courting rather aggressively. For ESPN, they do have Zach Lowe, who seems relatively connected as well. I do think that, I guess I don't want to speak for Zach Lowe. I've never met the guy. I really enjoy his podcast, by the way. One of the, once you're done listening to my podcasts, of course, one of the best basketball podcasts out there. And he strikes me as someone who likes a bit more of the basketball analysis standpoint than the insidery stuff. Although he is, I think, relatively connected and does quite well with the insidery stuff as well. Ramona Shelburne, she tends to break the bit more serious newsy type stuff, but she's very connected with the Los Angeles Lakers. She was very well connected with Kobe Bryant, and so I do think that can kind of spider off. But a very interesting hole that is left now at ESPN and in the basketball world in general. Shams is just ready. He is ready to go and take this one over. And I would imagine ESPN throws a relatively hefty contract at him. But yeah, it's been kind of an interesting time in media. Yahoo taking another go at sports with bringing Ariel Helwani on for, and all of his buddies, for enhanced MMA coverage. They bring in KOC from The Ringer for their NBA coverage. You have Woj leaving. The Ringer is always, I think, very good at hiring. The Athletic is always so good. And I wonder if they get an NBA insider that kind of wiggles the array into a little bit more of this space. And then Shams is Shams. So it is a very interesting time in the sports media landscape. And so, and hopefully there's room for stuff like this and stuff like Game Over that I do as well. By the way, subscribe over to the Game Over Calgary channel right now. But yeah, busy time in basketball as we start to get ready for the season. And you know what? Like, we're already here. We may as well just dive right into the the NBA season preview. The league, the season is getting closer and closer. I'm getting more and more excited for the NBA. And in doing kind of the prep for some of this, kind of realizing this is such an awesome time for the league. And we kind of discussed this a little bit yesterday, looking at the top 10 players in the NBA, but the amount of talent that this league has. Like, this was the first time since I started doing these back 3 or 4 years ago that LeBron's not in the top 10. And that, like, he has certainly fallen off a little bit. But he has fallen off, and so many players have risen up that there are just an unbelievable amount of talent. And I do think that part of that is why we will probably be getting at least 2 expansion teams coming up pretty soon. But all of that talent, where does a lot of it lie? Today, we are looking at the top 5 most talented teams in the NBA. Howdy, Toxic. Howdy, Toxic, and howdy, Deeds. Yes, thank you. Thank you for popping in. I gave Toxic a bit of a shout out before, but I do want to say hello to Toxic and to Deeds, the all-stars of the chat, as always. Coming in at number 5 for the most talented team in the NBA, it is the New York Knickerbockers. The Knicks have the turnaround they have. Like, when we look back 5 years ago, if you were to tell yourself back in just before the pandemic even, that, oh yeah, so just so you know, the best team in the NHL is going to be the Florida Panthers. And one of the best teams in the NBA is going to be the New York Knicks. Like, just giving you a heads up on all of that. You would have thought it would have been insane. But the Knicks have done a great job of, and it's one of the things we talk about when we do the team building episodes all the time. They built that foundation, they've set that identity, and now they are building around it. And the more I have talked to people who have played at high levels in sports, the more I think that identity thing is actually quite important. You need something when shit's going sideways. Like, look, this is what we do. Let's get back to doing it. It's something to bring it local. It's something I think the Calgary Flames have struggled with for a very long time. And I think they have tried to go the route of, we're gonna be like water, man. We're gonna, whatever style you play, we can play it. And I do think there is a value to that. But when you see in like mixed martial arts, John Jones, like, I'm going to do the thing you're best at. I'm going to do it better than you. George St. Pierre was very good at that as well. But both of them had that foundation first. You look in the National Hockey League, the Florida Panthers, they have, I think, the talent that they can kind of outskill you. They have the grind that they can kind of outgrind you. They have the defense. They can play the defensive style. They have all of these different styles, but it started with setting that identity with guys like Huberdeau and Barkov and Ekblad of this really tough to play against team, and it kind of blossomed from there. The Knicks have done that here in the NBA, where they hired Tibbs, and they're like, we are going to go all in on making this be a Tibbs team. This is no longer, the identity of the Knicks is no longer going to be, let's wait for a superstar to come here. After Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving were like, hey, deuces, we're going to Brooklyn, which worked out great for them. After that all played out, the Knicks, I think, understood, like, look, this isn't working. If Brooklyn has passed us for KD and Kyrie, which was a layup 3 months before the offseason, I think it was a wake-up call for them. And so they're like, okay, we're getting Tibbs, and we are making a Tibbs team. And they did an amazing job with that, to be able to build this roster around those guys. And now you have, then you go out and you get Jalen Brunson, and that helps, right? So now we have set that foundation, that identity. Now we need to go get, like, kind of the superstars who fit in with that. And to be fair, we didn't know Jalen Brunson was going to be this level of superstar when he was acquired by the New York Knicks, but we did have an understanding that he was pretty good, and he was going to be a pretty good fit on this team. And he turned out to blossom, and then everything kind of fit around him. And now, one of the final pieces that is added is Mikal Bridges. And now you look at the talent on this team. Bridges, who I think is really good. Brunson, who made the top 10 players in the NBA list yesterday. You have Julius Randle, 2-time All-NBA player, and they're already like, wonder where he's going to fit. Hart has been unbelievable at different times. DiVincenzo won them playoff games in the postseason. They have done a really good job of filling out talent that fits what they are looking for and building off of it. I am so high on the Knicks, and they are one of the teams where I just think the sport is better when they are good, and right now they are very, very good, and things are pretty fun in the NBA. At 4, it is the NBA champs from a couple years ago, the Denver Nuggets. They were higher on this list a couple of years ago, and certainly last year, but each year they're just losing a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. And these are the dangers of having championship teams in salary cap worlds. And you're never going to apologize for it. I'm not saying, yeah, you know what, actually winning the championship was a bad thing for Denver. That's certainly not the case. But to lose KCP, and then Bruce Brown is gone, and they've kind of lost a bit of this depth as things have kind of played out. Now all of a sudden it is a big 4 and then a lot of question marks. But it's still a very good big 4. Jokic, again, the best player in the league. I guess spoiler alert for the top 10 players in the NBA list that we did, if you haven't checked that one out. But Jokic, very good. Jamal Murray, has had a tough Olympics and has had a tough time staying healthy. But when he is out there, A, fits with Jokic perfectly, and B, is such a great creator, such a very good shooter, and attacks the rim so well. You have Gordon, who is incredibly important to what this team does defensively, and MPJ, who is such a skilled scorer when everything is going. With that top 4, you have to consider this one of the best teams in the NBA. At 3, it's the Minnesota Timberwolves. Anthony Edwards has been such a great breakout these last couple of years and has grown into being one of the best players in the NBA. He makes the top 10 list yesterday. You have Karl Anthony Towns, who, while incredibly flawed a lot, is also someone who can, score really, really well and can at least be a good big body that you can put on other big bodies to keep them from dominating in ways that big bodies do. And then the other pieces around, like Gobert, is what he is. And getting benched in the Olympics, not a great look when it's for France. But he is still one of the best defensive players in the NBA. And I just think with that trio there, and then some of the very, very good pieces that they have found to kind of build around that, this is now a very good roster in Minnesota. And so they are in at number 3. At 2, it's Oklahoma City. The moves they made this offseason have rocketed them up. You already had Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and Chet Holmgren, and all these other pieces to build around. And then you turn Giddey, who you couldn't even play in the playoffs. You turn him into Alex Caruso, who was created in a video game to fit this team perfectly and to fit what they need. And then to go out and get Isaiah Hartenstein in free agency. This is a perfectly built basketball team. And the only reason we don't believe that this team can go further is we haven't seen it before. But they are, I think, so clearly the best team in the West. And I think we could get to a point by like January or February where we're going to look back on this list and be like, why were they, 2 feels low. Why weren't they higher? I think this team is that good that they acquired, again, talk about team building. They make a gigantic trade to get Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and every draft pick from the LA Clippers, which has worked out great, by the way. And they have now been able to build up an amazing foundation. And then again, what do you need off of it? Well, we don't need the superstar. We got that in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Some crazy how. In a trade with the Clippers, we have drafted well. Now, let's go out and acquire these pieces and just do the finishing touches on this. They get that with Hartenstein, they get that with Caruso, and they do it perfectly. But in at number 1, it has to be the Boston Celtics. Jason Tatum made our list for top 10 most best players in the NBA last season, or going into this season. And he wasn't even the best player on their team in the NBA Finals. Jaylen Brown took a gigantic step forward last year, and that was not something I thought he had. I was very underwhelmed with Brown 2 playoffs ago when Tatum went out, and all of a sudden it was, oh, by the way, this guy can't dribble to the left, which is a scouting report that we gave guys when I was playing junior basketball in grade 8. And that should not be something that happens in the NBA. But he absolutely elevated his game. And then Kristaps Porzingis, who won't be ready for the start of the season, but the talent he has when it comes to shot making, being a big dude as well, and then rim protection, Holiday and White both elevating their game and the talent that they have. And then some of the other guys, some of the bench options who can come in and just launch threes. Pritchard, who is the greatest half-court shooter in the history of the sport. This is, again, we went over how this team was built. It is a phenomenal example of taking a team's depth and turning it into superstars and guys who fit a championship model. And Boston 100% deserves to be at the top of this list. So they are the most talented team in the NBA. All right, let's get into what I thought was going to lead the show today before one of the giants of the sports media world, Adrian Wojnarowski, announced his retirement. It is time for NFL Power Rankings. Week 1 in the NFL is generally the time for a lot of overreactions and stuff like that. At least that's what's assumed. But I really do think week 2 is the time for a lot of overreactions, because now you get you have another data point. There's now 2 options for confirmation biases. And if teams have looked good in back-to-back times, you have to believe it, because it's twice now. And if they've looked bad in back-to-back times, you have to believe it. It's twice now. So, I am saying all of this with a lot of self-awareness, because I think, overreacted on a number of different teams in my power rankings this week. There was a lot of shifting from week 1 to week 2. So let's get into it. I know I said there was a lot of shifting. Not at the bottom. The Carolina Panthers are the worst team in the NFL. I talked about this the other day, but Daniel Jeremiah was on the Rich Eisen show and said this is the least talented team he has seen in 21 years in covering the NFL. It is abysmal what the Carolina Panthers are. And yes, Andy Dalton is going to come in and maybe stabilize things a little bit, but this is still a team that has a bad offensive line, minimal offensive weapons, and one defensive player that concerns you. This is as starting from scratch as it gets with an NFL team. The New York Giants are at 31. Yes, I know. They probably should have won against the Washington Commanders last week. And if they had had a functioning field goal kicker, they probably would have. But this isn't just a power rankings for on-the-field stuff. This is an entire organizational thing, and boy did they fuck that up. When you know that your kicker is a little bit banged up, you bring in someone. There's a billion kickers out there. You get one of them. You don't need someone who can kick a 56-yard field goal. That was not the Giants' issue in this game. You need someone who can kick the 35-yard point after. Also, maybe punters should be able to do that. But we're in a specialized world. I understand that. Whatever. This was an abysmal loss for the Giants from an organizational standpoint. Also, I don't feel like enough people are getting on the Giants enough for allowing Washington to have 7 scoring drives. Yes, all of them were field goals, but still, you allowed the command. It would be better if it was 21 points by way of touchdowns, because then that's only 3 times they scored on you. For Washington to put together 7 drives on your defense that put points on the board is horrendous. And again, Daniel Jones has been brutal. Defensively, through a couple of weeks, this team has not looked very good at all. This is a very, very concerning run now for the New York Giants. The one thing I would caution for the Giants, I don't think, however this season goes, I don't think you fire the coach. I think Daboll is doing the best he can with what he has. The quarterback ain't it. And you have one good weapon. Wan'Dale Robinson is second on this team in targets. What is he supposed to do with that? Like, any scapegoating of the coach in this situation is incredibly unfair. And if he gets fired, other teams will pick him up immediately, because I think he is actually doing the best he can with this offense. At 30, it's Washington. They probably should have lost last week. The defense isn't very good. Jaden Daniels is getting absolutely smoked out there. And it's just not a very good football team. There isn't a whole lot. I don't need to spend a whole lot of time on these teams. I know I just spent a whole lot of time on the Giants, but we don't need to spend a whole lot on these teams. The Commanders suck. So do the Denver Broncos. They're in at 29. Bo Nix has made some very puzzling decisions in a couple of weeks, and again, we are seeing that this is just not a talented football team. The defense has made a couple of teams grind in a couple of weeks, but also they have played a couple of grinded out type of teams. I'll be interested to see what this Denver defense does against actual real offenses. Who does Denver have this week? This is something that I should probably know. Denver has Tampa Bay. So that is close to, certainly the closest to a very functional offense that Denver will have faced. So interested to see what the defense does, but the offense is bad. New England comes in at 28. They get the win 2 weeks ago against Cincinnati, an overtime loss against Seattle. Again, it's a bad roster. The offensive line can't protect anything. I will say, and it's been said, but if Drake May was playing, this team might be 2-0 right now, but that's not the point of this season. The point is let this kid learn and don't get him killed behind one of the worst offensive lines in football. But the defense does look legitimately like it could be a problem for teams. At 27, it is the Tennessee Titans. They probably should have won that game against the New York Jets, and they probably should have beat the Chicago Bears, and they probably should be 2-0. Thus the life of a young quarterback. I do think this is an improved roster. A little bit of this is just kind of playing the results right now with a couple of tough losses to start the season. At 26, it is the Chicago Bears. We all got a very good glimpse of what the issue is with the Bears on Sunday Night Football. The offensive line isn't very good. Caleb Williams, yes, there's a few times where it looks like that would have worked at USC, and it doesn't work in the NFC North. But I still think there are flashes of a very talented player in there. They didn't have Keenan Allen this last week. The offensive line is just going to be what it is. Like that there isn't going to be a fix for that, and so that's going to be a concern all year long. The one thing that gives you a lot of confidence for the Bears is that defense looks legitimately really good. At 25, it's Cleveland. I can't get them any higher than this because Deshaun Watson still doesn't look like an overly competent quarterback. I think they lose to most teams the way they played against Jacksonville. Again, the defense steps up and looks really good. At 24, it's the Vegas Raiders. You get a win over a team that we had in the top 5. You probably should be higher than this. It hasn't really looked all that confidence inducing over the last the last 2 weeks. And so I think when you look at an offense that is this conservative, a defense that, while they have some absolute studs, also has a few holes, I think you just get a little bit more and more concerned as things go along, and you can kind of poke a few holes in the Raiders. So it's tough to put them ahead of anyone else right now. At 23, it is the LA Rams. It's just injuries there was a lot of optimism after week 1. All of it is gone now. The offensive line has just been beat up. None of their pass catchers can stay healthy. It is now basically Kyren Williams and nobody else. And the defense got absolutely walloped last week. So major concerns ahead for the LA Rams. At 22, it is the Indianapolis Colts. Maybe a bit of an overreaction to a couple of close games against playoff teams, but that defensive game plan against Green Bay was so abysmal, I had to punish them and put them a little bit further down. To not come out of your cover 3, knowing that the team that you are facing can basically only move the ball on the ground, is just coaching malpractice and horrendous execution from the Colts has them down here. At 21, Jacksonville, kind of ditto, where coaching I feel like has really let this team down. Defensively, this looks like a very good football team. Offensively, I am getting more and more concerned that Trevor Lawrence just isn't the guy and isn't going to be the one that is able to pull the nose up on this thing. At 20, it's Minnesota. Defensively, they have come up with a couple of very good games in a row. Now, one was against the Giants, the other was against the San Francisco team that was missing Christian McCaffrey and had a banged up Deebo Samuel and had Brandon Ayuk just not existing. So, take those results for what they are. Sam Darnold, though, is moving the ball competently on offense in a way that he never really has before, and I think you're starting to see the emergence of a couple of other weapons. Aside from Justin Jefferson, you have Aaron Jones, who looks like a weapon, and Ty Chandler looks legit, so there's a couple of pieces to get excited about with Minnesota. At 19, it's Dallas. This is a gigantic free fall in the rankings for the Cowboys, but how could you not? The one win they have is against a team who we think is going to be bad, and the one loss they have is against the team that we think is going to be bad, and one was significantly worse than the other. Offensively, this team just isn't great. It's the conversation we have had, again, a second Daniel Jeremiah reference of the day. It is the conversation we are having after around Dak Prescott. Is he a truck or is he a trailer? Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks talked about this a lot on their podcast, and I think Dak Prescott is a trailer that is being asked to be a truck right now, and he's just not that guy. And defensively, like, they got whooped on, and that was eye-opening. Because I thought that at least the defense would be able to get enough pressure on Derek Carr to cause some issues. That didn't happen. And if they're not getting pressure, I think the secondary showed that even though they got a bunch of interceptions last year, maybe there's a few too many gambles being taken, and that leaves things a little bit exposed. At 18, it's Pittsburgh, one of the best defenses in the NFL, and an offense that just doesn't trust its quarterbacks right now. Leads to a lot of mid results, which leads to them being toward the mid of the power rankings. A gigantic fall for the Miami Dolphins. Part of it is, yes, they lost Tua, and the assumption is it's not going to be a lengthy loss. It sounds like he's going to be coming back soon, probably sooner than he should. Hopefully not, but we know how these things work. But also, I think what is being lost from that game on Thursday night is just how soundly the Buffalo Bills were whooping that ass going into that game, or going into that play with Tua. And so I think there are more concerns in Miami than I wanted to believe at the start of the season. Maybe that'll turn around, but we will see. At 16, it's Cincinnati. They're kind of right around where we had them last week. A good performance. Maybe they should have won. A couple undisciplined plays, kind of going back to the early 2010s with the Bengals, where, yeah, good team, but penalties kind of cost him. Jamar Chase let out all of his contract frustrations on a poor official, and that was absolutely pass interference late in the game. But it looked better than it did in week one, and I think you can be confident that this offense is going to continue to grow. I do have worries about the defense, but I do think that they are going to at least be okay. At 15, it's Seattle. It's 2-0. It's 2 wins over bad teams that I wish looked a little bit better, but you can see what's starting to develop on offense, and you can see how this talent is really going to win through on the defensive side of things. So it's a lot to get excited about, I think, with Seattle. We just need to see it in a bit more of an exciting fashion. At 14, the New York Jets. This feels a little high for them, even as I'm going through this. But you get a breakout of Braylon Allen to go along with Breece Hall, so that's another weapon that you have offensively. Defensively, they didn't get as gashed up this week, although certainly not against a team that is as good, but we are anticipating them to continue to get better as the season goes along, and so there's a bit of projection going on in this one. At 13, it's New Orleans. I never thought I would have New Orleans in the top half of the power rankings this year, but when you put up 2 explosive games like they did, it's really tough to argue. Again, I think the defense is legit. I think that the offense is a bit of a house of cards, but so far so good. It's looked very impressive out in New Orleans. And there have been some adjustments that have actually paid off with New Orleans, right? They have been able to use a little bit more pre-snap motion. They've been able to get another player involved in Shaheed. And that, along with Alvin Kamara kind of finding what he had lost a couple of years ago, make this a very fascinating team going forward. At 12, it's Arizona. I was just waiting to take this team seriously, and now here they are. 2 amazing offensive performances in 2 weeks. They were Josh Allen putting the Superman cape on away from being 2-0. The defense looked so much better against the Rams. Now the Rams dealing with all those injury issues for sure, but that wouldn't have mattered last year. It's still not a great defense, but I think this offense is going to be able to carry this team to a lot of wins this season out in Arizona. At 10, it's Tampa Bay. Even I slept on them this year. They were my darlings last year, but now Baker Mayfield, again, has this team running competent offensively, and defensively, they were really able to give Detroit some fits in week 2, and that's a tough offense to do that against. So a good showing there for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. At 9, it's Green Bay. Coming off of a win where you don't have your starting quarterback is very impressive. The defense being able to limit Anthony Richardson is really impressive. When everything gets back up and running, this team is going to be, I think, the contender that I thought they were going to be at the beginning of the season. At 8, it's the LA Chargers. Again, this feels high for beating 2 teams that we do not presume to be postseason contenders, but I do think that the LA Chargers are a team that is going to give some teams some problems. Defensively, they're going to be a grind to play against. Offensively, both Dobbins and Edwards look like they are going to be legitimate options in this offense. Quentin Johnston has kind of grown into being an option for Justin Herbert. This isn't a good offensive team, don't hear what I'm not saying, but it's going to be good enough to put up enough points that I think they're going to hang around with their defense. At 7, it's Baltimore. Yes, it's 0-2. I still think they looked good on Monday, on that Thursday night game against Kansas City. And I do have concerns about how easily the Raiders moved the ball, but Baltimore was in complete control of that game for 3 quarters, and then it just kind of fell apart. The offensive line needs to improve so that they're able to run out the clock, which is not something you thought you would say about Baltimore. Them not being able to run the clock and put that game away is concerning. But I still think there's a lot of talent on that team. At 6, it's Detroit. They slip on a banana peel and they lose to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week. But I still think the emergence of Jameson Williams is really impressive. And this defense with Aiden Hutchinson is improved from the group that I had questions about last year. As we get into the top 5, chat, if there's anything you disagree with me on, let me know. I can't imagine everyone agrees 1 through 32 with how we're doing on these NFL teams. At 5, it's the Philadelphia Eagles. They should be 2-0. Saquon Barkley with a really bad drop. I have concerns again about the defense, but this is still, I think, a very high level team in this league, and just one missed execution away, and maybe one bad play call away, honestly, from this team being a legitimate 2-0 championship threat. We're all talking about the Eagles after another win on Monday, but that's not the case, but I do think they're going to be fine. At 4, it's San Francisco. They get bumped down a couple of spots this week. I have concerns about how healthy they were last year, and now they're going to have to face a little bit more adversity with Christian McCaffrey out, with Deebo Samuel out. How do they adjust to that now on the offensive side is going to be very, very interesting. And I said I thought Brock Purdy might take a step this year. He's going to have to. If this team is going to hang around in the top 5. At 3, it's the Houston Texans. Honestly, it felt a little high coming off of a not overly impressive win over the Chicago Bears on Sunday Night Football, but I couldn't put them below. Like, are we putting San Francisco still ahead of Houston right now? No. Philadelphia? I don't think so. Detroit? No. Baltimore? No. Chargers? No. Like, saying Houston is number 3 in the power rankings after that game, it just feels high. But when you have an offense that can put up the numbers that they did in week 1 against the Indianapolis Colts, you have Nico Collins, who is able to kind of bust off a lot of those plays that he is, and the combination of speed and size is so dangerous and so impressive. Whatever run game they have, they're able to make it work. The thing that I think has them here right now is the defense. And yes, they got shelled for a couple of deep ones against the Colts in week 1, but that defense and how aggressive they turned going after Chicago in week 2 and the variety that they were able to show was really quite impressive. And I came away from that one still being very high on the Houston Texans. At 2, it's Buffalo. Are there some question marks around some of the skill position players? Yeah. Defensively, do we have a few worries? Maybe, but they really shut down the Miami Dolphins on Thursday night. And now, they didn't against Arizona, but I think we see how good Arizona is offensively. Monday night, they take on the Jacksonville Jaguars. That is a really, really interesting matchup to see how legitimate is this defense. It's an offense we don't super take seriously right now, but it's one that if they shut it down, it's like, okay, this is another data point that we feel confident in. And offensively, Josh Allen is just taking over. And at number 1, it's Kansas City. It was another reminder that this is a team that isn't going to blow out everyone every single week. In a last-second win over the Cincinnati Bengals. And they are dealing with some injuries as well, with Isaiah Pacheco going down. But defensively, this team is still elite. And you still have Patrick Mahomes. Travis Kelce hasn't gotten going yet. And you have a couple of very good pass-catching options that you should be excited about. I just see no reason to knock Kansas City off of this perch just yet as the number 1 team in all the land. So, those are the power rankings coming out of week 2 in the NFL. We're not done with rankings yet, though. The UFC had another card this weekend. It was Noche UFC, UFC 306, and we had 2 title changes, which means we have some big changes happening to the pound for pound rankings. Let's go over the pound for pound top 10, men's and women's, in the UFC. Again, if you guys have any disagreement or just think that the ranking's awesome, in the chat, let me know. And we can have some fun discussions off of that. But yes, pound for pound rankings. On the men's side, let's start at number 10. The first couple don't really change. Alex Volkanovski, no, he does not have a championship anymore, but the only losses he has are to guys who are in the top 5 in the pound for pound. So you can kind of excuse a few of those, and I still think talent-wise, he deserves to be there. At 9, it is Leon Edwards. Again, a tough loss. It's against someone who is a bit above him in the rankings, and he did have 2 wins over Kamaru Usman when I had Usman very high in the pound for pound. So I have to include him in this list. Our first change comes at number 8 as Merab Dvalishvili makes his way into the rankings, winning a UFC championship, beating someone who we had at 4 previously in the rankings with Sean O'Malley. By the way, O'Malley out of the rankings entirely. That was a pretty one-sided loss, and so I felt like I had to really drop him out, given the level of competition that there are, in the pound for pound rankings. At 7, Bilal Muhammad, the welterweight champion, coming off of a win over Leon Edwards in his last bout. At 6, it's John Jones. If we are going all time, obviously this might be a little bit different, but just due to inactivity, he has to go down a little bit on the list. At 5, it is Tom Aspinall. An unbelievable heavyweight run so far, and just with how aggressively he is knocking people out, and the fights that he has been able to put on, and the quality of fighters he has been able to beat, he absolutely is deserving of being in the top 10. If Sean O'Malley gets knocked out of the top 5, of the top 4, that means a new person has to go in, and it is Ilia Topuria. He's beat Volkanovski. That gets you up there. Now he has a very big fight with Max Holloway coming up. A very, very interesting bout, and one that I think sets him up to like almost a legacy-defining fight, so to speak, for him. So he comes in at number 4. At 3, it is Dricus du Plessis. Again, he beat Israel Adesanya when Izzy was at the top of these rankings. He beat Sean Strickland when Strickland made his way into these rankings. He has been able to control things as a fighter, and I have him at number 3. At 2, it is Pereira, middleweight champ, former middleweight champ, now the champion at 205 pounds. I want him to go up to heavyweight and have some fights. If he does that, he rockets to number 1, but just an unbelievable talent, and someone whose star has been on the rise in this company for a really long time. So he comes in at 2. And at number 1, it is Islam Makhachev. I know Dana White said that anyone who has him at number 1 is insane. Well, call me insane then. 2 wins over Volkanovski, who was at number 1 at the time, certainly has to have you there. He has been dominant in basically every performance that he has had, with the exception of one against Volk. I don't see how you don't, with the resume that he has, put him at number 1 in the pound for pound rankings. So that's the men's side. What about the women's side? There was another title change at UFC 306, and that was in the women's bantamweight division. Women's flyweight division, where Valentina Shevchenko gets the win over Alexa Grasso, which shakes up the pound for pound because Grasso was at number 1 going into that fight. At number 10, it is Tatiana Suarez. Again, there is a little bit more of this that is based on her talent and ability than there is on a resume. If she could just stay healthy, man, she is, I think, by far one of the most talented fighters in women's mixed martial arts, and honestly, maybe ever. It just has not been able to click for her in a way to get her up the rankings quickly to get those opportunities. Hopefully, it works out soon. At 9, Rose Namajunas, a big win recently to get herself back into this spot and working her way into an opportunity coming up in Edmonton in November to be able to work back into a title shot. The woman she is fighting comes in at 8. 8, it's Blanchfield. Again, an excellent run. Now she has a gigantic fight coming up against Rose Namajunas for potentially a title shot. At 7, it's Alexa Grasso. A couple wins, or a win and a draw, over Valentina Shevchenko keeps her on the list instead of Sean O'Malley, who dropped off entirely after his loss. I do have concerns with how dominant Shevchenko was over Grasso and the lack of adjustments that were made by Alexa Grasso coming out of that. But I do think that there is still a very talented fighter in there and someone deserving of being in the top 10 in women's mixed martial arts right now. Or women's, I guess, in the UFC right now. At 6, it is Yao Xiaonan. Again, very talented fighter who has been able to put up some very good wins in working her way up the rankings. At 5, it's Raquel Pennington, champion right now. It's been quite the redemption story for her. She faces Juliana Pena next. Pena beat Amanda Nunes, lost to her then immediately, but a win against the women's pound-for-pound GOAT. You're going to stay on the list for a very long time. And a chance now for her to get back that strap coming up in a couple of months here. At 3, it is Manon Fiorot. Apologies for the pronunciation, but just an unbelievable run that she has been on right now. Any tough test that she has had, she has passed it with flying colors, and so I think very deserving of this spot. At 2, it is Zhang Wei Li. She is, again, a champion right now and has put together an incredible resume and continues to impress every time she steps into the octagon. And at number 1, she's back up there with a bullet. It is Valentina Shevchenko, coming off of a dominant win over Alexa Grasso, reclaiming her championship, 11 championship fights in a row, one of the greatest in the history of the sport, and she gets back on top with a win over Alexa Grasso. So those are the updated pound-for-pound rankings in boxing and in men's and women's UFC. I'm getting ahead of myself because now we get into the boxing pound-for-pound rankings. Canelo Alvarez with another win at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada, as he beats Edgar Berlanga to continue his winning streak and his reign of dominance atop the sport of boxing. Or is he atop the sport? It is now time for the pound-for-pound rankings. At 10, it is Teofimo Lopez. He had a bit of a slip-up, but has recovered very well since then, and that win over Lomachenko is still something, even though it was a few years ago, is still something that hangs out on the resume and makes him a pound-for-pound fighter. At 9, it's David Benavidez. There is a little bit of projection here. The resume maybe doesn't stack up as a pound-for-pound resume, but the talent certainly does. And it is to the point where he just has not been able to get the fights that he wants, which has been incredibly frustrating for him. And so there is, I think, a little bit of frustration in the world of David Benavidez right now. Coming in at number 8, it is Devin Haney. He has... Well, when you go through the resume and you're picking out, like, okay, could this guy make it? Oh, no, he lost to Haney. All right, what about this guy? Oh, no, he lost to Haney. It's like, well, enough very talented fighters have lost to Devin Haney. I think we got to put Devin Haney on this list. So he comes in at number 8. At 7, it is Gervonta Davis. He has so many marquee wins on the resume and just such a ferocious style that makes him one of the more exciting fighters in the sport, which shouldn't matter, but it does. He comes in at 7. At 6 and 5, it's 2 fighters who are going to be fighting next month. At 6, it is Dmitry Bivol. At 5, it's Artur Beterbiev. I am so excited to see these 2 guys throw down and just kind of figure out who the number 1 fighter in their weight class is right now. I am so excited for that fight. They come in at 5 and 6. At 4, it's Canelo. I can't get him onto the podium right now. He is staying at 4 after a win over Berlanga. If he goes out in his next fight and does get a David Benavidez or even a Terence Crawford, even though I think Crawford moving up that much in weight is a hindrance to him, that is still a gigantic name, and it would still move him up in here. But I can't get him over the top 3 right now with the guys who he is fighting. Again, I love Munguia, but that is not a win that gets you higher up in the pound-for-pound rankings. Berlanga brought a brawl out of him a little bit. That is not a win that gets you up the pound-for-pound rankings. You need to fight high-level guys to move up ahead of these top 3. At 3, it's Terrence Crawford. The absolute domination he had of Errol Spence Jr. keeps him in the top 3. A win over Madrimov that wasn't as impressive, but still a good win, and moving up in weight keeps him in the top 3. Excited to see what he does next. At 2, Alexander Usyk. A lot of times it can feel like a cop-out to put a heavyweight champion at the top of pound-for-pound rankings, but what he did at cruiserweight and what he has done as basically just a cruiserweight who's slightly heavier now has been very impressive, with the win over Tyson Fury, undisputed heavyweight champion until the IBF disputed it. He is so talented at what he does too. I do feel like, again, we kind of talked about this with Demetrius Johnson. If you just either shrunk or grew everyone to be the exact same size, I think Usyk wins most of these fights anyway, with just how talented he is and the skill set that he brings. And at number 1, it's Inoue. Another destructive win out in Japan. If you haven't watched this guy fight, because most of his fights are at like 3 in the morning, just pull up a highlight or pull up a fight of his. Everything, the power he has for the small weight classes that he fights in is truly remarkable. And no, there aren't the big names that he has been able to fight, but there have been very accomplished fighters at the smaller weight classes that he has just blown through. And again, if we moved everyone to be the same height, he comes out and knocks everybody out. And so Inoue is still the pound-for-pound king in the sport of boxing. All right, it's time to wrap up the show today, looking at some hockey talk. The NHL season is fast approaching, and with it comes a lot of pressure for a lot of players and coaches. Today, we are looking at the players and coaches on the hot seat. Who needs to have a good year this year in the NHL? Let's start with the coaches. Coming in at number 5, it's Rod Brind'Amour. I think Brind'Amour is the best coach in the NHL. I think it's absurd to suggest that he would be on the hot seat. But there was enough fire around his contract situation last year and enough debate around it that I just feel like he needs to have a good year. Also, I will say, again, while I think he is one of the best coaches in the league, if not the best coach in the league, at some point this team has to win. At some point, even with the talent that they lost, and we talked about them in the undervalued teams yesterday, with the talent they lost, they have been a very good hockey team for a really long time. And they've added big names like Burns. They've made big deadline acquisitions like Gensel. And they still have not been able to get over the hump and get into the Stanley Cup final. At some point, there's going to be pressure to do that. Fairly or unfairly, I think there's going to be that pressure. At 4, John Tortorella with the Philadelphia Flyers. I think that he did a great job in dragging a good season out of this team last year. I do have some concerns about the growth of this team going forward. Also, he tends to wear out his welcome a little bit. And him on a bad team tends to not go super well. And so I just worry about how this team is going to do and how he is going to react to that. So he is at 4. At 3, Andre Tourigny for Utah. I had him on the list last year with Arizona. I think you can kind of explain away a lot of what happened in Arizona this last year. It was a very, very tumultuous season, shall we say, where midway through the year, all your players are trying to figure out, like, hey, where are we going to live next year? And that became a bit of a talking point and became a bit of a distraction. Now they're in Utah, and we have seen teams do quite well early on in their new spots. Vegas, Seattle. Seattle might be a bit of it. I guess Vegas is the exception. But we have seen that there is some pressure to try to grow this. And Utah has come out and made some big moves, acquiring Sergachev, which I forgot to mention in my overvalued thing with Tampa Bay. I think that the move from McDonough to Sergachev is actually bigger than people are realizing. But I think that there's going to be pressure on Utah to make a move here this year. And out in Detroit is Derek Lalonde. He is number 2 on my list. Detroit has made a couple of big moves in the last couple of years by going out and acquiring DeBrincat and making some very good draft picks to try to push. And each year it gets close, and they got very close to the playoffs last year. They just didn't get there. If this is another year where it's close, but they just didn't get there, I think Derek Lalonde is packing his bags and getting out of there. And at number 1, it's the Pittsburgh Penguins. Some of the pressure is off with Sidney Crosby signing an extension, but I don't think it's a very good roster. I do think that it is a team that probably needs some change, and I do think that it is a roster that, given some of the cap whatevers, is going to be difficult to change. And so, what change can you make? The coach. So I do wonder if Mike Sullivan needs a very good year for the Pittsburgh Penguins to kind of keep his job out there this year. Now, let's get to players on the hot seat. At number 5, it is Nikolai Ehlers. There's a lot of talk about him getting moved by the Winnipeg Jets anyway. He has long been a guy who it has kind of felt like a ton of talent. Either coaches don't trust him or it just hasn't clicked or whatever it is. But I do think there's a very good hockey player there. At some point, it has to just work though, right? And at some point, the lack of opportunities you're getting is kind of on you to a certain degree, I will say. And again, it's been a long enough period of time where I think you say that. I do think that he kind of needs a good year here, or there's a lot of pressure on him here, or he might be going elsewhere if Winnipeg wants to go in a different direction. At 4, it's Thomas Chabot. I think there's a ton of talent in this kid, and I think the world of him as a hockey player. But it has been a rough couple of seasons. Now it's been a rough couple of seasons in Ottawa, but it's been a rough couple of seasons for him. And there was a lot of talk, and most of it from the fan base, of trying to get this guy out of town. And like, oh, well, maybe in a Noah Hannafin trade, would you guys take Chabot back instead? That is the part where, and a lot of Flames fans are like, we're good. That is the part that should concern, I think, with him, is that your fan base has soured and other fan bases don't want him. Again, I think he's really good, but I think he needs to prove it this year. Again, with a lot of pressure on Ottawa to try to make their way back into the playoffs. They move on from Chychrun. They didn't get a whole lot back for him. There's going to be pressure on Chabot to help get Ottawa across that finish line. At 4, it's at 3, it is Trevor Zegras. Anaheim feels like they're ready to take a step. And while their young players have progressed, Zegras has kind of just stayed the same. And there have been injury issues and there's been all of this. But it does feel like if Anaheim wants to make a big roster-altering move, he would be the very easy one to do that on. Me personally, I think he's wildly overrated. I think he can do some flashy shit, but I think as a actual producer and a make players around you better, I don't think he's all that great. And so I think if you can get for Anaheim, maybe a bit more for him reputationally than you are actually getting for him as a hockey player, that can be a really big adjustment and a really big upgrade for your team. And so I think if Anaheim isn't taking that step that they want, he's going to be the one who's on the way out. At 2, Freddie Anderson. We talked about the pressure that's on in Carolina. I do think Freddie Anderson had a couple very good games in the playoffs, but I do think that Freddie Anderson let in some absolutely boneheaded goals that cost the Carolina Hurricanes in the postseason, and it really set them back. And they have, again, even though they lost a bit this year, they still have such a talented roster. But he has to be a guy who can go out and steal some games, and has to be at least a guy who's not going to lose them some games. And he was a guy who lost them games last year. He needs to not be that this year. And number 1, it's been the talk of the offseason. It's Mitch Marner. Mitch Marner was on the trade block. It felt like it's just kind of perpetually on the trade block. Given the contract, given the lack of success that the Toronto Maple Leafs have had, he and the contract status of everyone else, he is now feeling like the one who could finally, of that core 4, face some kind of repercussions for this team's lack of success. I don't think it's a secret they tried to move him during this offseason and just couldn't. And so if he wants to stay a Toronto Maple Leaf, and honestly, I wonder what that contract looks like after this season anyway. He will probably get paid. I'm not saying he's going to get 4x5 or anything like that, but I do think there's a lot of pressure on this kid this year to set himself up for the future and to show one last time that maybe this thing can work out in Toronto. All right, that's going to do it for the stream today. Thank you, Toxic and Deeds, in the chat. Fun as always. Thank you to you watching, if you are tuning in live. If you missed anything, or if you're watching this now, it is on YouTube. We put up every episode, plus divide up each segment so you can just get what you're looking for over on YouTube. The audio is also available in podcast form. We'll be back on here one more time today, 2 o'clock. We're doing another Calgary Flames stream on NHL 24, and the next live podcast stream is going to be Friday. That one, gonna try something a little different. We're gonna go Friday at noon. That is probably going to be the time slot for Fridays moving forward. That's the thought right now, anyway, is Friday at noon back here on twitch.tv/primetimepk. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'm always open to any feedback you want. I want these to be as fun and interactive as possible. So we'll have that happen. Let me know. And yeah, thanks for tuning in, and I will see all of you later.